Hello, my name is Javan Santos, and I'm the Policy Manager for the Climate Initiative. We're going to look back at some of the policy highlights of COP26 and going over what climate advocates need to know as we move forward. The first thing I want to highlight is America's place at COP26. We saw a huge presence of America at COP26. We saw Al Gore, we saw Barack Obama, we saw President Biden, we saw 44 congresspeople. This powerhouse presence makes sense as the US tries to reassert itself as a climate leader, as it just recently rejoined the Paris Climate Accord. But one thing that needs to be highlighted is that the US assisted in blocking what was hoped to be one of the major accomplishments of COP26. It was a way for developing nations to access funding for climate disaster loss and damages. The US and the EU both played a role in blocking the funding. According to them, they didn't want to open the floodgates for lawsuits. But as some of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, leaving the conference without a solid plan to help these developing nations is a major disappointment, especially because COVID prevented many of those nations from attending in the first place. However, the phrase loss and damage did appear several times in the Glasgow Pact, the agreement that came out of COP26. So hopefully that paves the way for a future loss and damage mechanism to be agreed to. The next thing I want to highlight is Obama's speech to young people. Like I said earlier, Obama was at the conference, and he delivered this high-profile address to the youth of the world in the hopes of inspiring them on climate action. One of the biggest highlights was encouraging young people to vote. Talking about voting for leaders who will pass policies that will stop climate change, Obama said to young people, vote like your life depends on it, because it does. I would also like to highlight that in my experience, young voters are either so jaded from politics that they refuse to vote, or they think politics doesn't affect their daily lives. But voting for political leaders that will pass the climate policies we need is a huge part of the battle to stop the climate crisis. So please, educate yourself on candidates, ask them questions, vote, but also hold elected leaders accountable by paying attention to the policies that they pass. If they don't support the policies needed to stop the climate crisis, then we must advocate, organize, and vote for candidates who will. More information on this will be available at our TCI Toolkits, which you can access at the resources tab at theclimateinitiative.org or at the link in our Instagram bio. Next, I want to talk about India, because they've been a major player at COP26. There was a lot of mystery surrounding the role India would have at the conference, and honestly, people weren't expecting too much from them. This is why it shocked and excited many people when India announced at COP that they would be carbon neutral by 2070. This was seen as a huge commitment, as India is the fourth largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, behind the European Union. Is it enough to stop the climate crisis? No, not according to scientists. But people were surprised they got a carbon neutral goal from India in the first place. This excitement was short-lived though, because in the last few days of the climate conference, India read out some controversial language at the Glasgow Pact. What used to read the phasing out of coal had been changed to phasing down, according to the language India's delegation read, though India denies they were the ones who created the language. This was another disappointment of COP26, and it's hopefully something we can be more ambitious about at conferences to come. Lastly, let's talk about COP27. To me, the biggest and most exciting announcement at COP26 is that it was announced that the parties were requested to update their nationally determined contributions by the end of 2022. Nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, are the goals that countries pledge around limiting greenhouse gas emissions. This is exciting because NDCs were originally supposed to be only updated every 5 years. Seeing as, despite this year's pledges, the Earth is still on track to warm by 2.4 degrees, there's still much more to be done to get the world down to 1.5 degrees. This announcement means that climate advocates can use this agreement to push their countries to improve their NDCs next year, or even in anticipation of COP27, and cite that their leaders signed the Glasgow Climate Pact that had requested them to push their goals even further by next year. These were the major policy events, but there was so much more that happened at COP26. For example, Greta Thunberg had a heated response to carbon offsets. Additionally, there was criticism for the amount of private jets, and the amount of meat and dairy products at COP26. Ultimately, the things that I highlighted, I believe, are the major policy happenings that young climate advocates should know. In summary, support loss and damage funding for nations hurt by climate disasters, vote in candidates who support climate policies, and push for stronger language and stronger NDCs. COP26 just ended, but there's so much more work to be done for climate advocacy in preparation for COP27, in 2022, and in general as we continue our advocacy to address the climate crisis. If you're interested in becoming a part of the climate movement, you can go to theclimateinitiative.org and become a TCI ambassador today. I'll link my sources, and thank you for watching.